Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Andrew Winters, and I'm an assistant professor here at the University of Louisville, Kent School of Social Work. We are continuing with our series of events for Social Work Month, and today we want to focus on social work with individuals who identify as Latinx. I had the honor of speaking with Hector Zamora and Dorothy Sato about important aspects for social workers to consider when working with clients who identify as Latinx. Thank you to Hector and Dorothy for your contributions to the Kent School of Social Work.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Hector Zamora. I'm currently the National Coordinator for Internships and Field in Education Instruction with Dismissed Charities. We're a nonprofit organization. We operate residential reentry centers around the country, primarily contracts with the Federal Bureau of Prisons and U.S. Probation, as well in some centers with federal pretrial. My experience primarily is in community corrections, having started out working with adult probation and juvenile probation in El Paso, Texas. I also have taught for over 20 years at the community college and university level with criminal justice and for a few years with social work. I'm a former licensed sex offender therapist as well, worked in that field for 16 years, working with adult and juvenile clients. And I did serve in the military as well, in the Marine Corps and the U.S. Army Reserve. And so my interest is broad-based as far as working within the system and also working with students. And that's primarily where I have focused my career pursuits.
Okay,
Thank you,
I
Hector.
think it's
Dorothy?
Yes, hi everybody. It's nice to be here with you. My name is Dorothy Sato. I am from Brazil. I have been living in this country since 2013, but fully merged in the American society, I think since 2018. I was previously living in Houston. I spent over there 3 years, yeah, 3 years, 3 or 4 years. And then I moved to Louisville to pursue my education in doctor studies in social work. So I am currently living here since 2018, as I said. That's me.
Well, thank you both. I'm happy that we can spend some time together here today. So our guiding question is, what is important for social work students and educators to know regarding the Latinx individual and their community?
Well, that's a very important question when it comes to the population. And I think we could substitute the word Latinx for other people of color in the United States, because I think it's important for students to learn about all populations. But since today we're focusing on the Latinx, I believe that there are several areas for them to consider as far as what should be taught in the classroom and how can they apply that out in the field when they're conducting their internships. But let me pose this question as well, sort of like when you consider that. So what's the difference between Latinx and Hispanic and all the other labels that we give people, but again, within the population that Latinx is referring to? Is Latinx meant to be more representative of the diversity of what we were calling under the census term Hispanic? Is it meant to be more encompassing, but does it really do that? Okay, and so the point I'm making is it's very difficult to classify a very diverse group of people under one term. And that's one thing I want to emphasize, that it is not easy to do that. We do it more so for the simplicity of when we're talking about this large diverse population when we use one word, but that's why I go back to that question. Well, really, what's the difference between Latinx and Hispanic? You know, we're talking about the same diverse population. We're just trying to be, I don't know, nicer, more inclusive by using that term. So, but the bottom line is we're talking about a very diverse population as well.
Mm-hmm. I think this is a very, very important point that Dr. Hector have been done. When arriving in this country, it was pretty difficult for me to fit in these labels. Actually, I didn't know that those labels existed. And I find myself that figure out where I was in these groups. And I found out that I was none of them, and I'm still learning. Some terms for me sounds pretty much academic, and but in a daily based life, it's different for me because I'm not really Hispanic or Latino, because my cultural heritage is so plural, and for myself, I identified me as Brazilian, and but being here, I understand that I fit in the Latino culture, but it's still navigating these terms. I'm not pretty much know or confident about saying that I'm particular part of this group. I'm Brazilian. In my soul, I feel like that, but I know that in America there is this need to classify it people, maybe to represent them in a more easier way. But for us, it's easier to say by nationality, for example.
Yeah, I really appreciate what the two of you are offering. Part of what I'm hearing there is because the term is so broad and sort of thought of in a different way, it sounds like the takeaway is really to ask the person, who do you identify with and what do you prefer? Because Dorothy, as you're saying, you identify as Brazilian. So that's what would be important for me to know about you, as opposed to categorizing in this sort of larger umbrella term.
As Brazilian, I have my different cultural background that when compared, for example, with a Mexican people, is a little different. As a matter of fact that, for example, we don't speak the same language. And I have encountered a lot of people here that they think that Brazilians speak Spanish, and we don't. And also I have met a lot of Latino people that have parents or, past generation that were originally from Mexico or whatever, and then don't speak the language. So it's so broad, it's so complex. And but I think the cultural traits make a lot of difference when you try to identify a group of people.
There was a student I was speaking with recently that's doing her internship at one of our distance centers, and she's in the middle of a cultural diversity class. And she was saying, so much has changed, and she identifies herself as a white female as far as dealing with cultural diversity, to the point that she put it in her terms, before I felt I was climbing a hill as I was understanding cultural diversity, but as the situation in America has changed, there's more awareness, more protest going on about the type of abuse that is going on around the country towards minorities, and yet this is, I told her, an extension of our history when you look at it completely. But now she feels she's climbing a mountain, and I was saying, well, consider that you're looking at something that pretty much, in my opinion, was handled with a lot of underemphasis. In other words, it's almost as if we're rewriting American history today, the bad part of the history, the reality of the history, the harshness of the history, of how people were treated to make the country what it is today. And again, that's part of a very separate issue, but at the same time tied into what we're talking about. We're talking about whether it's Latinx or other minorities that have been utilized to help build this country through labor and other means and so forth. And again, one could go all the way back to, of course, even the colonies and pre-colonies and what was going on in South America with slave labor and on and on. And so again, it's historically based in the sense of the concerns and issues and the realities that when you opened up your American history books in elementary, middle, and high school, it wasn't there, or very little of it was there. So it was very much, coded in a sense of, well, let's keep it nice, let's not deal with the harshness of the history. And so cultural diversity in a way is saying, are you able to acknowledge that? And so as we were discussing that, as far as in her class, the applications towards her field work and those cultural diversity issues that she was dealing with, she was wondering, well, do I deal with the elephant in the room? I'm white. If my client isn't, am I supposed to address that relationship we have based on our backgrounds? And I'm saying, well, no. The reason I said no was because, what does the client want? I mean, you're going to ask them initially as you get to know the client, what is your preference? How do you identify, as depending on what your service is that you're providing and so forth. But what does the client prefer to be identified as? If they have a problem with you, then, see, and then we come out through the ongoing process of working with them and so forth. You can explore that, but it's not like, well, let's just put it all out here, who I am and what you are. They're not there necessarily to discuss your cultural diversity issues, okay? They're there to discuss services and so forth. So I said, so that's not the first priority of the client. Let's discuss, cultural diversity versus I need services. So let's focus on that. But if there are some issues, let the client bring it up. I do believe, and I constantly want students to emphasize as far as understanding who you are, okay? How should I understand who you are, who you identify as and so forth? Help me to understand that. And so that's your part of established cultural diversity. And I know I'm simplifying it. I know there's a lot more that we want students to understand as well. But in thinking of what the student was asking, I was emphasizing to her these cultural diversity approaches, and again, using Latinx as an example, is really meant to create an awareness within yourself, okay? An awareness of what you should be aware of other people. And in the process, be able to help you identify, do you have biases, prejudices, and so forth that you may not have been aware of, or that you're very aware of, and how does that fit into social work? Should you even be in social work? Can you look at a person that walks into your office, into your program, as a human being first, versus looking at their color and anything else that you feel makes them different from you? And so again, when we think about the Latinx, if they look at myself, if they look at Dorothy, who do they see? Okay, and therefore, from that perspective, how do they proceed to work with us? So, in many ways, again, that goes back to that diversity of the Latinx population. Going back to what Dorothy was saying, yeah, when I was growing up, I was an American. I was born in the United States. As I began to develop my own cultural awareness, and I saw, okay, so my grandparents and my father was born in Mexico. So, okay, so I'm of Mexican descent. When the Chicano movement was going full force, I thought, so am I Chicano? In the sense of protesting the abuses and the discrimination and the inequities that exist in our system when it comes to all different areas, and to realize the actual history of that population, that being Latinos, Hispanics, Mexican Americans, and others. And so I felt very comfortable for myself as far as identifying as a Mexican American, where my family comes from as far as the country, but acknowledging that I'm also born in America. But with that came an interesting response, where I was dealing with white Americans, I'll use that term, who didn't see me as a complete American because, well, you're not us, okay? And then when I would visit Mexico, well, you're not born here, so you're not really one of us either. And so it's sort of like, when you look at the different populations, as far as when we talk about Latinx, there's even the identity of, well, who do I fit in with? And the reality is, well, you fit in with where you believe you should fit in with, okay? And if groups don't accept you, well, welcome to the world. It's not happening just in the United States. So,
That's true.
so it's a constant, interesting way to help students realize, as we discuss other issues, about the fitting in type of challenge that various populations face, not just based on ethnicity or race, but other differences that we have as people. So again, it was interesting to see that in the student processing that. And I thought, well, that's the purpose. You're looking at yourself, you're beginning to ask these questions, and you're beginning to ask yourself, how does that fit in to how I conduct myself as a social worker? And to the point she even asked, I wonder whether I should go into social work because, here I am as a white female, and yet I'm trying to provide services. What if they don't want to work with me because of my background? It says, "No, trust me, that's not going to be an issue with the majority of clients you have." Okay, and those that do have an issue, you process that with them.
When I go to Brazil, I always face this problem, even though I'm a Brazilian, even though I speak Portuguese, my heritage is different. My background is Japanese. So people, when, when see me in Brazil, they say, well, I see that you are mixed, not really Brazilian, but it's not so big deal in Brazil because Brazilians are so mixed. So we kind of have fun about that. And this fun, I couldn't find in here, and it's more serious and more painful.
I remember that when I was reading about in classes and so forth, when I was working on my education, about America being a melting pot and how that sounded so great, in the sense of, wow, we're all coming together as one and so forth. And that's ideal, isn't it? We're all on the same page.
Yeah.
And then as I began to become more aware about cultural diversity and leaving behind the, as you're calling it, Andrew, the whitewashing of history, that, oh yes, we all are one great melting pot versus, no, we're not. But that's not a bad thing. To me, the pluralism of the country in the sense of is acknowledging who you are as a person and what you believe what you believe in, what you represent, and the beauty of that versus saying no, you have to be like everyone else, and what is everyone else, and so I think the melting pot acculturation approach in America, my opinion is no, it doesn't exist because we are different. We acknowledge our differences, but we respect our differences, but we look at the strengths of our differences, and that's how we become the country that we are, which is again a challenge. You put together over 300 million people and say, okay, everybody get along. It's like, wow, that's not easy.
That's not
Yeah,
easy, yeah.
people being what they are, yeah, good luck. You can't even get along with your family sometimes. Come on. And so again, it's a challenge. And so to me, it's
Yeah.
being able to even if you look around your classroom and you say, we all seem the same physically, okay, but in a sense, but we aren't, okay, in the sense of that individuality. And how does that individuality come together as a group and how we work together and so forth. And so I think the challenge for students is in a sense of saying, so how do I find how to work with that? Again, what I think is more realistic to say that we're more of a pluralistic society. But the challenge is how do we actually make that work? If we're saying we're going to coexist, but do we? Not all the time. And sometimes we're going to have pockets here and there of where it's obvious it's not working as well as we'd want to. But does that mean we give up? Does that mean that we don't continue making the effort to coexist? One of the things I've always liked to use with clients and students is hope springs eternal. To me, the reality is just like in social work, you may not have been able to help that previous client, but you've got a chance to work with the next one. You get to build upon what you're learning, what you've experienced, and how to make things work. And so don't ever give up that hope, because in a sense, when you look back on the history of mankind, even or people, the reality is that we've kept trying to move forward in spite of ourselves at times. And so in looking at the strengths and weaknesses of our society, and how pluralism is a challenge, my belief is that, well, each one of us contributes to making that work, at whether we're talking about the micro, meso, or macro level. We have those opportunities to do so. And so that's where I encourage students to look at, as far as, okay, so how do you make the efforts to coexist? And don't get me wrong, it's not that I'm not saying, well, can we just all be together and so forth? Well, yes, but in our individuality, and yet consider the strengths of that.
I think this diversity in this country is wonderful. You have a chance to know different culture without travel. And this is so rich. And I sometimes I feel, sorry because a large population of Americans are losing this opportunity because they just want to try to divide the people and isolated people and say that the culture is not valid because they are living here in this country. This is completely different, and they don't embrace. So I'm sorry, but this is a big opportunity that people are losing.
If you look at the generations, you can see how in some families the younger generations are pulling away at times. I'm not saying everyone, but at times it's interesting to see at times the younger generation pulling away from their parents and grandparents' traditions, cultural practices and beliefs and so forth. Even language, where they don't learn the language of their grandparents, where the country that they came from and so forth. And I see that in the Latinx populations at times. It varies. It's not like automatic, and that goes back towards stereotype. Oh, you're Hispanic, you're Latinx, you speak Spanish. And like Dorothy's gave, well, no, I speak Portuguese, and so
Yes.
and some say I don't speak any language except English, and so that individuality takes into consideration that it's not automatic that, oh, these are your parents and grandparents, therefore you're like them as well. And many times we see that no, it can be very different, and or where they don't really connect at all to what their parents or grandparents practice in the sense of cultural identity, traditions, whatever that may involve, whether it's music, food, etc. So thus the individuality, I think, approach is very important, because again, we want to get away from stereotypes just because of their last name, because of their physical features and so forth.
And we know that, for example, Latin community, they embrace religiosity, spirituality in a way to survive the oppression. This is historical. We can see in their saints, in their sacred deities, how they embrace those personified person and, worship them as an inspiration to overcome challenges and odds. And we know that is particularly important for Latin Americans, Latin people. They not only practice their faith in churches, they do not necessarily have to go there. They practice at home. They keep their family together by these principles, and they connect religiosity principles to the moral principles, how they will work in the society, because it's based in that religions. And it's a chain of connection, not just religious but moral, but cultural traits. It's everything they put together. So and from this perspective, religions is very important for Latin people.
And I think at the same time, it also has evolved, as far as looking at the different type of religions that have now become part of the Latinx population's practices. Whereas before, many would think that, oh, well, since it started out with the Spanish conquests of what is Mexico, Central America, South America, and so forth. So this Catholicism type influence, and how that's changed over the last couple of centuries, in the sense of where you see a more Protestant influence or other type of practices as well. And I think along with Dorothy's emphasizing is that what does that mean to that individual as well? And so not automatically assuming, well, you belong to this type of religion or church, versus you may practice Christianity, but it may not be the church you thought it was going to be. And so, as far as how that has evolved in the population, that again, to consider the importance of that that belief system that they may have, but what is that belief system today for them? So the religion of their grandparents would not be the religion of that individual today, as that also, I believe, has evolved in the sense of the impact that we've
A lot.
seen religion play on the Latinx population. And so again, that goes back to that, being aware of that individual. And so what do I understand about you as to what you identify with in all these different aspects of your life? And so again, that's another example of the importance of taking that into consideration.
Yeah, one point is important how to understand the border. We live in the borders, and not physically, but symbolic borders. And this is all about, I think, American society face. Perhaps this has to do with ethnocentrism, nativism, and that American culture is the best and everything is not so good. And uh, probably part of this process, when a Latin person is losing the connection, is naturally could happen because living here and receive this message, or they are not involved anymore with their culture. So it's yeah, it's difficult, but I think we have to be aware. And then I'm talking from myself, that my culture is beautiful. My culture is so rich, and I should keep that, you know. And the culture here also is nice. You know, not everything in mine or in American culture is 100% okay, but I can absorb, much of these opportunities in both cultures. I'm not saying that Brazilian culture is perfect. We have, things that I don't like specifically, but the majority, I love the food, I love the way they celebrate things, I love our simplicity of life, this kind of stuff, but things that I don't like over there. And same here. My only concern is when somebody else says, your culture is nothing, because I have heard this before, so as you are here in America, you have to adapt. You must do that. This type of language, I think this is danger, you know. Uh, but it's normal when you live abroad, you lose something. But you have to be aware that you have bridges. You have to be connected. You have to be, and people around us help to do this when they are willing to know about your culture, about your country, for example. Yeah. And
The thousands of people that are currently at the Mexican-American border, the U.S. border, that are asking for asylum and so forth. And just for students to be aware that, well, really, we're talking about migration, a practice that we've seen with populations for centuries, as far as to why people migrate and so forth, and that the populations currently at the border are people that are leaving poverty, violence, corruption, and so forth. And so it's only natural that they're going to come try to enter a country that offers them opportunity and hope. And so to me, whether we're talking about Latinx populations or others, the ideals that this country has appeals to many people from all around the world as far as why they would come here. And so trying to balance humanitarian efforts with legal issues can be tough, I understand. But again, I just want to remind everyone that as far as the students, that consider the humanitarian issues that go on, and from a social work perspective, as far as, rather than automatically saying, well, they don't belong here and so forth, mentality that sometimes we may see from different parts of our society. but just the basic reason why people do what they do when it comes to migration. So again, I know that's a side note, but since it's an ongoing event in our history as well.
Absolutely.
It's not side note, it's an important note, Dr. Hector. Yeah, those people are coming here because they are facing too much struggles. And this is a good opportunity as a social worker, as a student, to understand the road. You know, they come here because the situation in their countries is so unbearable. So we cannot imagine how those people, so of course, you know, we are talking about the disenfranchised people. And those people who cross borders by foot, you know, spend days and days under, you know, severe conditions and threats. They are not coming here for fun, or they are not in, oh, okay, I will cross borders, it's going to be fun. Oh, good, let's go. No, they don't have options. So I think this perspective, as Dr. Hector is saying, humanitarian, it doesn't have a border. You have to understand that there are very bad situations. And unfortunately or fortunately, America is a good opportunity. So it's a problem, you know, but we cannot just lock the door and say, well, people, you have to stay there. No, we have to understand. We have to have this open mind to understand.
Yeah. Well, thank you both. I appreciate your time and your willingness to share with the Kent School of Social Work.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, I would ask you to consider the bust of Cesar Chavez that President Biden has in the Oval Office right now. To me, that sends a very distinct message of, well, who is this person? You know,